From its roots in ancient alchemy to its role in modern culture, alcohol presents a paradox, a substance that offers temporary relief while often veiling deeper truths. The alcohol sitting on your shelf has a secret origin tied to ancient mysticism and alchemy, a connection so profound it could change the way you see reality forever. What lies hidden in the term al-kuḥl might just blow your mind. Before alcohol became a beverage, it was a word cloaked in spiritual mystery. To uncover its original meaning, we must journey back to the heart of the Islamic Golden Age, a time when science and spirituality were deeply intertwined, and alchemy was regarded not just as chemistry, but as a divine pursuit. The term al-kuḥl didn't originally refer to the intoxicating liquid we know today. In classical Arabic, kuḥl described a fine black powder, a cosmetic substance made by grinding the mineral antimony. This powder was used as a dark pigment applied to the eyelids, a practice still seen today in many Middle Eastern and South Asian cultures, known commonly as kohl. But there's a deeper layer beneath the surface. This wasn't just makeup. The act of lining the eyes with kuḥl had a symbolic purpose. It was believed to enhance vision, not just in a physical sense, but also in the spiritual realm. To see clearly meant more than avoiding visual blur. It meant gaining insight, developing foresight, and penetrating the veils of illusion that obscure higher truth. In other words, al-kuḥl was associated with clarity of perception, both outer and inner. This idea that a purified, concentrated substance could grant enhanced perception would later evolve. The term al-kuḥl expanded to describe any distilled or refined essence. Through the lens of Islamic alchemy, it became a word for the soul of a thing, the spirit extracted from matter. Whether through fire, pressure, or time, the alchemist's goal was always the same: to isolate the pure from the impure. So when wine was distilled, and its most potent parts separated and collected, what remained was called al-kuḥl, not because it made one drunk, but because it was considered the spirit of the grape. The term began to travel westward, transliterated and reshaped, eventually becoming alcohol. And thus, a word that once described spiritual clarity and purified essence became linked with something that often clouds the mind. What was once used to see beyond, now used by many to forget. As al-kuḥl travelled through time, so did its meaning. And that shift was far more than linguistic. It reflected a transformation in how humans viewed matter, energy, and the soul embedded within all things. What began as a physical powder meant for the eyes gradually took on deeper, more metaphysical connotations. In the sacred laboratories of Islamic alchemists, who viewed their work not only as chemistry, but as a spiritual discipline, al-kuḥl began to represent the distilled essence of any material. It became a term not just for antimony, but for the spirit extracted through fire. Whether working with plants, minerals, or wine, these early scientists believed that everything held an inner purity, a soul, waiting to be revealed through the process of refinement. And it was distillation. The careful, almost ritualistic process of heating a substance until its most volatile, purest elements rose and were collected, that revealed this hidden core. The steam condensed into liquid again, but it wasn't just any liquid. It was the soul of the original material, separated from its grosser elements. This process mirrored their philosophy of the human soul. Just as substances could be boiled down to their essence, the soul, too, could be purified through fire, not literal flames, but the fire of suffering, contemplation, and spiritual practice. Alchemy wasn't just about gold, it was about inner transformation. And so, the word al-kuḥl expanded beyond cosmetics, becoming shorthand for any spirituous extract. When the juice of grapes was fermented and then distilled, the resulting clear, potent liquid, the very essence of the wine, was also called al-kuḥl. This terminology spread westward. As it moved through languages, al-kuḥl became alcohol, but its alchemical symbolism remained intact, even if misunderstood. The drink we now call alcohol was once revered not for intoxication, but for its representation of purity, essence, and the soul. But somewhere along the line, something was lost. What had once been associated with clarity and the pursuit of divine truth slowly became a tool for escape and indulgence. A sacred word had become a casual commodity, and few remembered the mystery it once held. To understand why alcohol was once seen as sacred, we need to enter the heart of ancient alchemy, a world of symbols, transformation, and fire. At the center of that world stood a single, powerful process: distillation. To the modern mind, distillation is technical, boiling a liquid to separate its components. But to the ancient alchemists, it was spiritual philosophy in action. Imagine a vessel placed over flame, the substance inside bubbling, breaking, and evaporating. The steam rises, condenses, and collects elsewhere, purified. The essence is drawn out, and the residue is left behind. What you're seeing is not just chemistry, it's a ritual of refinement, a metaphor for the human soul's evolution. The alchemists believed that just as impure wine could be distilled into a clearer spirit, the human being could be transformed, burned by life's trials, boiled in emotional suffering, and eventually purified into wisdom. Distillation mirrored spiritual ascension. Matter was never the end goal. It was a gateway. And what was distilled? Not just substances, but essences, the soul of matter, the spirit. It's no coincidence that the word we use today, spirit, refers both to alcoholic drinks and to our inner being. Alchemists saw no separation. When they referred to the distilled alcohol from wine or herbs, they were naming something sacred, a concentration of purity. An extract of what is essential, leaving behind all that was coarse, heavy, or base. The alcohol we sip today is the result of that same process, but stripped of its context. What was once symbolic of rising above the physical is now consumed for its ability to make us forget it. We distill, but we no longer honor. This is the core of the paradox. Alcohol, the spirit, is created through a holy method, meant to symbolize enlightenment. Yet its modern use often leads to dulling, to unconsciousness, to disconnection from self and source. The fire that once freed the soul now fuels distraction. And unless we remember the sacred origin of distillation, we risk confusing the illusion of transformation with the real thing. At the heart of alchemy lies one great truth. Everything has a hidden essence, and the goal is to reveal it. In this framework, alcohol wasn't just a substance. It was a symbol of the soul itself, not the physical body, not the mind, but the invisible core, the eternal, refined part of us, waiting to be uncovered. To the alchemist, the process of distilling alcohol mirrored the process of spiritual awakening. Just as fermented wine was heated until its spirit rose and condensed into something clearer, so too was the human soul thought to rise. Not through fire, but through life's inner heat. Suffering, sacrifice, discipline, and love. The soul, like alcohol, must pass through trials. It must separate from the material, from the mundane, from distraction and illusion. Only then could it be experienced in its purest form. Radiant, clear, powerful. That's why alcohol was revered in sacred texts and rituals across cultures. It wasn't the drink that was honored, it was what it represented. In Christian symbolism, wine becomes the blood of Christ, not because of its chemical makeup, but because it represents the essence of spiritual sacrifice and divine love. In Sufi poetry, wine is a metaphor for the ecstasy of divine union. In ancient rites, intoxicating substances were sometimes used to symbolize the lifting of the veil between the worlds. But all of this hinged on one vital understanding. Alcohol, as a spirit, was meant to point inward. To be a mirror, not a mask. The tragedy is what came next. Over time, people began mistaking the symbol for the substance. They reached for the bottle to feel the transcendence it once represented, without doing the inner work it once demanded. The soul once symbolized by this clear essence, was replaced by the fleeting pleasure of intoxication. What was once a metaphor for awakening became a shortcut to escape. And so the word spirit, which once pointed to the highest part of us, became associated with one of the most common ways we lose ourselves. What was once sacred became routine. But the deeper truth still remains, if we have the eyes to see it. The greatest irony of alcohol lies not in its effects, but in its forgotten origin. Once revered as the purified spirit of matter, alcohol was meant to symbolize transcendence, a marker of the soul's ascent. The alchemists who distilled it weren't seeking pleasure, they were chasing purity. And yet, in the modern world, alcohol is no longer a sacred extract. It's a commodity, a casual indulgence, a weekend ritual, a numbing agent. We now reach for the spirit not to elevate, but to escape. This is the paradox. What was once the essence of clarity is now used to blur. What was once a symbol of purification is now an avenue for excess. The spiritual has been flipped into the recreational. And the transformation that once required inner work is now mimicked in minutes, poured into a glass, swallowed in silence, or worse, celebration. But make no mistake, the symbolism hasn't disappeared, it's just been distorted. When someone drinks to feel free, they are echoing a deeper, perhaps unconscious desire for liberation, the same liberation the soul seeks on its spiritual journey. But instead of climbing the ladder of consciousness, they descend into a fog of altered states, further from awareness, further from clarity. Alcohol's modern use creates a mirror image of true transformation. It brings change, but not growth. It offers release, but not realization. The ancient purpose of the spirit was to remind us of our essence, that beneath the layers of ego, emotion, and experience, there is something pure, something that cannot be corrupted, only revealed. But in modern consumption, that inner reminder has become a distraction. The spirit that once symbolized awakening is now used to delay it. And the cost? More than just health or hangovers. The true cost is disconnection. From our center, from our higher self, from the sacred. The very essence that once uplifted has become an anchor, holding the soul in place while pretending to set it free. Yet the original meaning still flickers beneath the surface, waiting to be reclaimed, not with lips, but with consciousness. To the casual drinker, alcohol may feel like freedom in a bottle. A few sips in, and the anxieties soften. The rigid ego loosens its grip. The world feels lighter. The burden of thought, of self-consciousness, of daily restraint, all seem to dissolve. For a moment, it's as if you're floating just above the weight of your own existence. But this sensation, however alluring, is an illusion. It is not transcendence. It is a chemical mimicry, a short-lived simulation of what true spiritual liberation feels like. And therein lies the danger. True transcendence, the kind spoken of by sages and seekers across time, requires discipline, surrender, and presence. It is earned through introspection, stillness, prayer, and the refinement of consciousness. When it comes, it brings real peace. Not a buzz, but a bloom of light within. A lifting that does not fade. Alcohol, by contrast, provides a shortcut with a cost. It offers an artificial high, but always with a shadow. The morning after, the mental fog, the emotional numbness, the physical drain, reveals the truth. The freedom it promised was rented, and the price was not paid in money, but in vitality, clarity, and connection. And yet, this illusion persists because it touches something very real, the human longing to be unburdened. Beneath every drink is a subtle ache, a desire to feel joy without cause, to love without fear, to float above the noise of the world. Alcohol whispers, "Let me take you there," but it never truly delivers. It only distracts. It creates a false door to a false room and calls it liberation. And the more we step through that door, the further we drift from the path that leads inward, the only path where real transcendence is found. What's tragic isn't that alcohol fails to free us. It's that it convinces so many that they have already been freed. The drink numbs the prison walls, but never opens the gate, and so the soul remains captive, chasing euphoria in cycles, forgetting that what it truly seeks can't be swallowed, only awakened. Deep within the center of the human brain lies a tiny pine cone-shaped gland, small, mysterious, and ancient in its symbolism. This is the pineal gland, known across esoteric traditions as the third eye. Mystics, yogis, and philosophers across cultures have long regarded the pineal gland as the seat of spiritual vision, a bridge between the physical and the metaphysical. It is believed to be responsible not just for regulating sleep cycles, but for opening channels of intuitive insight, deep perception, and communion with higher states of consciousness. And here's where the conversation turns serious, because alcohol, while seemingly harmless in its social context, has a profoundly disruptive effect on this spiritual center. Alcohol acts as a neurotoxin, dulling the brain's electrical activity and suppressing natural functions. But its impact on the pineal gland goes beyond biology. Regular consumption is said to cloud the third eye, making it harder to perceive subtle energies, emotional truths, and inner guidance. In other words, alcohol numbs the very instrument we need to see clearly without our eyes. Imagine the pineal gland as a sacred lens, polished through prayer, meditation, and silence. Over time, this lens becomes clearer, revealing truths not visible to the physical senses. Now imagine dousing that lens in a fog, the kind that temporarily feels freeing, but actually blinds you to your own depth. That is what alcohol does to the third eye. Mystical traditions warn that when the third eye is dulled, we become more susceptible to illusion. We rely on shallow perception, unable to sense deeper realities or respond to the whisper of the soul. We get lost in noise, unable to hear the inner voice that calls us back to stillness. This isn't about morality. It's about consciousness. It's about choosing clarity over confusion, intuition over impulse. When the pineal gland is activated, life becomes a dialogue with the divine. But when it is veiled, we stumble through the world disconnected. Not because we lack purpose, but because we can no longer feel it. And that disconnection doesn't begin with trauma or tragedy. Often, it begins with a drink. What begins as a subtle fog eventually thickens into a veil. One drink becomes many, one escape becomes habit, and over time, something far more precious than sobriety is lost. It's not just physical health or mental clarity that fades, it's the delicate, often unspoken connection to the divine. In the earliest stages, the effects of alcohol may seem harmless, even helpful. It softens edges, quiets fears, and loosens the grip of daily stress. But with repetition, it begins to erode the very pathways the soul uses to communicate with the higher self. This disconnection doesn't always announce itself loudly. It creeps in slowly, through feelings of restlessness, spiritual numbness, and an inability to sit in silence. The inner voice that once whispered with clarity becomes faint. Meditation feels empty. Prayer becomes mechanical. Intuition, that sacred internal compass, is no longer felt as deeply. And we begin to wonder why we feel stuck. The truth is, alcohol doesn't just fog the brain, it clouds the subtle body, the energetic field that mystics have spoken of for centuries. This field is finely tuned to divine frequency. It picks up on synchronicity, on signs, on truths that logic alone cannot grasp. But alcohol distorts that frequency. It pulls the soul into heavier vibrations, making it harder to ascend, or even notice the path upward. When this happens over time, spiritual practices stop working. We no longer feel the light. We chase moments of joy, but they don't last. We search for meaning, but nothing seems to resonate. What's really happened is this. The connection has been dulled, not destroyed, but dimmed to a whisper. And that's what makes alcohol so spiritually deceptive. It doesn't always break us. It numbs us. It lulls us into thinking we're fine, when in truth, we've lost the signal that once guided us home. To reconnect, one must first become aware of the silence inside, the quiet absence of something sacred. Only then can the work of reconnection begin, not by adding more noise, but by gently removing what never belonged. Because the divine doesn't leave us, but it will wait for us to listen again. In the spiritual traditions of the East, particularly in Hinduism and Buddhism, there exists a concept known as samsara, the eternal cycle of birth, death, and rebirth. It is driven by attachment, desire, and ignorance, keeping the soul trapped in a loop of suffering. Alcohol, in its modern use, reflects this cosmic cycle in miniature. It offers moments of escape, followed by consequences. Pleasure, followed by pain. A high, followed by a crash. And after the crash, the yearning begins again. This is the essence of samsara, the seductive repetition of that which does not fulfill, yet is continually pursued. At first glance, a drink might appear as a break from reality. It seems to dissolve anxiety, soften sorrow, or provide relief from inner turmoil. But this relief is temporary, and that's precisely how the cycle begins. Because the more fleeting the pleasure, the more powerful the craving for its return. The result is a loop, subtle for some, devastating for others. One seeks the feeling, not the substance. And in chasing the feeling, they become entangled in repetition. The glass becomes a symbol, not of celebration, but of recurrence, of returning to a state of disconnection under the illusion of release. In spiritual texts, this loop of suffering is broken not by indulgence, but by awakening, through mindfulness, self-inquiry, and renunciation of false comforts. True liberation comes from recognizing that external solutions cannot resolve internal unrest. But alcohol, by its very nature, delays that recognition. It promises transcendence while reinforcing attachment. It offers comfort while feeding the root of discomfort. It becomes a substitute for the very thing it imitates, and thus deepens the cycle. And so, like the soul in samsara, the drinker often finds themselves returning to the same spot, again and again, searching for something that cannot be found at the bottom of a glass. Until the loop is named, it cannot be escaped. To break free is not to deny desire, but to redirect it, from the temporary toward the eternal, from illusion toward truth. Only then can the wheel of suffering begin to slow. The human soul carries a longing, ancient, persistent, and often unspoken. It is the desire to rise above the mundane, to dissolve into something greater, to feel peace, presence, and unity beyond this fleeting world. This longing is not a flaw, it's a compass. It pulls us toward spiritual growth, toward connection with the divine. But when we don't understand this yearning, or when we lack the tools to answer it, we reach for substitutes. And few are more seductive than alcohol. Alcohol doesn't just numb pain, it creates a simulation of transcendence, a temporary shift in consciousness, a brief suspension of fear, of ego, of separation. In those first moments of intoxication, one might feel open, uninhibited, even elevated. But this sensation is a chemical illusion, a shadow play on the wall of the cave, not the light outside it. It mimics the soul's natural desire for unity, but without offering the transformation required to reach it. Real transcendence demands effort, inner work, stillness, surrender. Alcohol offers an easier path, but easy is not the same as true. The danger lies not just in the illusion, but in how convincing it is. The mind is tricked into thinking it's found peace, that it has touched something sacred, when in fact it has only temporarily dulled the noise, and when the effects wear off, the yearning returns, often stronger, often lonelier. This is how alcohol becomes a false sacrament, a ritual without redemption. It replaces spiritual practice with escapism. It creates a cycle where the seeker forgets what they were seeking in the first place, and the soul, misled by chemistry, is left to wander further from the path it was meant to follow. Yet, the original desire, the one behind every pour, every sip, remains. The soul still calls out, even beneath the fog. To recognize alcohol as false transcendence is not a condemnation, but a revelation. It's a moment of clarity that says, what I'm seeking cannot be found here. And in that moment, something shifts. The craving doesn't vanish, but it begins to point in a new direction, not toward escape, but toward awakening. Behind every act of indulgence lies a motive, and beneath every craving, a deeper yearning. This is especially true when it comes to alcohol. What appears on the surface as a desire for stimulation, relief, or escape is, at its core, the echo of a spiritual longing, the soul's ancient call to return home. This longing often goes unrecognized. It manifests as restlessness, emotional emptiness, or the feeling that something is missing, even when life looks full. The drink becomes a placeholder, a substitute for something the conscious mind can't always articulate. But the soul knows. It's not craving intoxication, it's craving union. Alcohol mimics what that union feels like. The loosening of boundaries, the shedding of inhibition, the momentary feeling of connection with everything and nothing all at once. But these are hollow reflections, chemical imitations. They provide the form, but not the substance. True union, the kind that mystics and saints speak of, is not a moment of altered perception, but a complete alignment with the divine. It's an awakening, not a sedation. It sharpens the senses rather than dulls them. It doesn't dissolve you into forgetfulness. It brings you into full awareness of your eternal self. When people say alcohol makes them feel more like themselves, they are unknowingly pointing toward this truth. They're not wrong. They are simply misidentifying the source. The freedom they feel doesn't come from the drink. It comes from touching, however briefly, the part of themselves that longs to be liberated, the part that knows it was never meant to be confined by ego, fear, or separation. But alcohol cannot fulfill that longing. At best, it distracts from it. At worst, it buries it deeper. The soul does not want to be numb. It wants to be whole. So the next time a craving arises, not just for alcohol, but for escape, pause and ask, what am I truly yearning for? That question alone is a doorway, a step off the spiral of imitation and onto the path of return. Because beneath the craving is always a cry, not for intoxication, but for home. Few have captured the spiritual hunger of the human soul like Jalal al-Din Rumi, the 13th century Sufi mystic and poet. His verses dance between longing and love, between emptiness and divine ecstasy. And throughout his work, one symbol appears again and again: wine. But Rumi's wine is not fermented grape juice. It is not poured from bottles. It does not cloud the mind. It awakens the soul. For Rumi, wine was a metaphor for divine love, an intoxicating closeness with God that strips away the ego and floods the heart with bliss. When he urged readers to get drunk, he wasn't talking about taverns or chalices. He was speaking of surrender, to become so overwhelmed by the presence of the divine that all sense of self dissolves. Be drunk with love, he wrote, for love is all that exists. This kind of intoxication doesn't dull the senses. It expands them. It opens the eyes to beauty in all things, softens the heart to pain, and makes the soul feel infinite. Rumi's wine was the sacrament of awakening, not the anesthetic of forgetfulness. But even Rumi, in all his rapture, offered caution. He warned of the false wine, the physical substance that mimics divine joy, but delivers only distraction. He saw how people reached for the bottle in search of what only the beloved could give, and he pitied that mistake, not with judgment, but with sorrow, because he knew how badly the soul wanted to fly, and how easily it could be tricked by things that only numbed its wings. The drunkenness Rumi praised was not a product of alcohol, but of losing oneself in the beloved. It was a dissolution of boundaries, not by chemical haze, but by pure love. To mistake one for the other is to trade the eternal for the temporary, the ocean for a puddle. When Rumi says, "Drink the wine of love," he's inviting you into a higher state of being, where intoxication does not come from outside, but rises from within. A state where you are not less yourself, but finally all of yourself, poured out and overflowing with light. In the 20th century, the mystic and spiritual teacher Osho brought ancient Eastern wisdom into sharp dialogue with the modern world. Known for his radical honesty and piercing insights, Osho addressed everything from love and meditation to fear and freedom. And among these, he also spoke clearly about alcohol. For Osho, the journey of the soul is a path of awakening, and the key to this journey is one word: awareness. To be fully alive, one must be fully present. And to be present, the mind must be clear, not inebriated, not distracted, but rooted in the now. Alcohol, in Osho's view, was a barrier to that presence. He didn't moralize it, he analyzed it. He understood why people drank, not out of celebration, but as a way to escape themselves, because facing life directly, without filters or sedatives, is terrifying to many. Pain, uncertainty, insecurity, these are heavy loads to carry. Alcohol offers an easy release, but it is not real. Osho often described alcohol as an anesthetic, a drug that dulls the mind and disconnects the individual from reality. It doesn't remove suffering, it simply numbs perception of it. And in doing so, it also numbs joy, beauty, love, clarity, all the things that make life vivid and worth living. He taught that transformation happens through awareness, not avoidance. The discomfort people try to silence through alcohol is actually a doorway, a call to go deeper. But alcohol slams that door shut. It tells the seeker, don't look inward, stay asleep. And so, the soul misses its opportunity. Instead of growing through pain, one loops back into it. Instead of evolving, one remains stuck, temporarily comforted, perpetually distracted. Osho's message was simple, but uncompromising. Awareness is the only true liberation, and any substance that clouds that awareness, no matter how pleasurable it seems, is a step away from truth. He invited seekers to sit with their discomfort, to face their wounds, because only then can healing begin. To walk the path of awakening, one must choose presence over pleasure, clarity over comfort. And in Osho's world, consciousness was sacred, and never to be traded for a fleeting sip of silence. Among the most revered spiritual teachers of the 20th century, Paramahansa Yogananda brought ancient yogic wisdom to the modern Western world. In his timeless work, Autobiography of a Yogi, he taught that true freedom lies not in the outer world, but within, through the disciplined cultivation of mind, body, and soul. For Yogananda, the spiritual journey was about self-mastery, the conscious refinement of one's energy, thoughts, and desires until they became aligned with higher purpose. And at the heart of this mastery was clarity, the clarity to sit in silence, to feel subtle energies, and to commune with the divine within. Alcohol, in his view, was a powerful obstacle to this clarity. He likened the human mind to a tranquil pond. In deep stillness, it reflects the light of the soul. But every ripple, every distraction, indulgence or craving, disturbs that surface. And alcohol, he taught, doesn't just ripple the pond, it stirs it into chaos. Yogananda warned that alcohol weakens the willpower needed for spiritual growth. It makes the mind restless and erratic, distorting one's ability to concentrate, a faculty essential for deep meditation. Without the strength to focus, the seeker remains tethered to surface thoughts and unable to sink into the sacred silence where true realization arises. He also emphasized that alcohol affects the vibrational frequency of the body and aura. Instead of uplifting the energy centers, it pulls them downward, making communion with higher states of being far more difficult. And because it weakens the natural discipline of the soul, it opens the door to other forms of indulgence and forgetfulness. For Yogananda, spiritual awakening was a daily discipline, a sacred alignment. Every thought mattered. Every choice either brought the seeker closer to divine union or pushed them further into the fog of delusion. And so, alcohol was not a harmless indulgence. It was a spiritual detour, seducing the soul away from its path by dulling its vision, weakening its will, and distracting its devotion. To walk the path of light, Yogananda taught, one must preserve inner harmony, not just in moments of prayer, but in every breath, every action, every choice. Long before modern science explored the effects of alcohol, ancient spiritual traditions across the world offered powerful, unanimous warnings. Intoxication clouds the path to the divine. In Buddhism, abstaining from intoxicants is one of the 5 precepts, ethical principles that lay the foundation for mindful living. The reason is simple. Alcohol dulls awareness, which is the very foundation of enlightenment. It distracts the practitioner from the present moment and severs their ability to act with clarity and compassion. In a tradition where mindfulness is everything, even a single drink can become a significant detour from the path. In Hinduism, the ancient law book known as the Manusmriti warns that alcohol corrupts both the body and mind, leading to the breakdown of self-discipline. It's not just the act of drinking that's frowned upon, it's the spiritual damage it creates. For Hindus who seek moksha, or liberation from the cycle of birth and death, indulgence in alcohol is considered a regression, a step backward on the ladder of awakening. Sufism, the mystical branch of Islam, frequently uses the metaphor of wine to describe the rapture of divine love. But physical wine itself is discouraged. Sufis are seekers of inner intoxication, not chemical illusion. To them, the wine that leads to God is metaphorical, derived through surrender, prayer, and ecstatic union with the divine. Physical alcohol, by contrast, is seen as a veil, a false ecstasy that separates rather than unites. In Gnostic Christianity, worldly intoxication symbolizes the soul's entrapment in the material realm. The Nag Hammadi texts describe the wine of the world as a snare, a distraction that keeps the spirit bound in illusion. The true wine, they taught, is gnosis, spiritual knowledge that awakens the soul and liberates it from ignorance. Even within mainstream Christianity, this dual symbolism persists. While wine represents sacred communion in the Eucharist, excess is condemned. Proverbs 20:1 declares, "Wine is a mocker, strong drink is raging, and whosoever is deceived thereby is not wise." Across all these traditions, the message is clear. The path to truth demands clarity, and anything that distorts that clarity, no matter how pleasurable, becomes a spiritual burden. Because to walk with the divine, one must see with clear eyes and feel with an unclouded heart. Among the world's great religions, Christianity holds one of the most paradoxical relationships with alcohol. On one hand, wine is used in the most sacred of rituals, the Eucharist, representing the blood of Christ, the covenant of eternal life and divine communion. On the other hand, Scripture warns repeatedly of its dangers. As a deceiver, a mocker, a source of spiritual downfall. This duality is not a contradiction. It's a mirror of humanity's struggle with intention and moderation. In the Last Supper, Jesus lifts the cup and says, "This is my blood, poured out for the forgiveness of sins." In that moment, wine becomes a symbol of sacrifice, of divine love made manifest, and of the eternal bond between the human and the holy. The wine is sacred not because of its fermentation, but because of its meaning. It becomes a portal, a reminder of suffering transformed into salvation. But that same wine, when stripped of purpose and consumed for pleasure, becomes a spiritual trap. Proverbs 23:31-32 warns, "Do not gaze at wine when it is red. It goes down smoothly, but in the end it bites like a snake." In this view, alcohol is not evil by nature. It is misused power, something that can sanctify or destroy depending on the soul that wields it. This is the Christian mystery. A thing can be holy in one hand and harmful in another. It all depends on the spirit in which it is received. Early Christian mystics understood this well. For them, the wine of the Eucharist was symbolic of divine intoxication, the overwhelming experience of being filled with the Holy Spirit. It was not about losing awareness, but about becoming fully alive, fully surrendered to God. But when alcohol is removed from its sacred context and consumed without reverence, it no longer uplifts the soul, it entraps it. The ritual becomes routine. The symbolism becomes shadow. And so, Christianity's treatment of wine is not a contradiction, but a cautionary parable, that what carries the power to connect us with the divine also carries the risk of pulling us away if we forget its purpose. In the end, it's not about the wine itself, it's about what you seek through it. In the sacred language of mystics, philosophers, and alchemists alike, the term wine has long carried a hidden meaning. Beyond the vineyards and cellars, beyond the glass in hand, lies a deeper, invisible wine, the true elixir, sought not by the body, but by the soul. This true wine is not made of grapes. It is not poured by human hands. It is the essence of divine grace, a spiritual intoxication that arises when the soul unites with something infinitely greater than itself. This wine is not consumed through the lips. It flows through the heart. It does not cloud vision. It reveals truth. In the ancient mystical traditions of alchemy, this elixir was known as the quinta essentia, the fifth essence. It represented the purest substance, distilled from the four earthly elements and transcending them. It was believed to contain the healing, awakening power of the cosmos itself. To drink of it was to be transformed, not chemically, but consciously. And in the spiritual realm, this wine has always symbolized union with the divine. In Sufism, it is the cup of the beloved. In Christian mysticism, it is the chalice of Christ's love. In Gnostic texts, it is spiritual gnosis, sacred knowledge that liberates the soul from illusion. But here lies the danger, mistaking the symbol for the substance. The physical wine, alcohol, was once a symbol of this higher joy, but when consumed mindlessly, it becomes a false messenger. Instead of leading one inward, it turns the seeker outward, chasing moments of bliss in external form, rather than cultivating the inward light that never fades. To find the true wine is not to drink. It is to awaken. It is found in silence, in devotion, in moments when the ego dissolves and something eternal takes its place. It is the joy that arises unprovoked, the tears that fall in prayer, the stillness that feels like home. This is the real intoxication. No bottle can hold it. No hangover follows. Because this wine does not fade, it frees. And once you taste it, you no longer chase illusion. You seek only the source. Throughout history, mystics across cultures have spoken of a peculiar state, a kind of intoxication that has nothing to do with alcohol, yet leaves the soul reeling in ecstasy. They called it divine madness, blissful union, or spiritual drunkenness. It is the result not of a drink, but of direct communion with the divine. This experience, often described in poetry, prayer, and parable, is known as spiritual inebriation. And it is nothing like the dulling effect of alcohol. In fact, it is its opposite. Physical intoxication numbs. It clouds. It disconnects. Spiritual inebriation, on the other hand, awakens. It heightens awareness, expands perception, and dissolves the ego into something vaster, timeless, and sacred. Mystics like Rumi, Saint Teresa of Avila, and Sri Ramakrishna wrote of being drunk on God, of their souls overflowing with divine love to the point of weeping, laughter, or wordless stillness. This was not madness. It was clarity beyond reason, an encounter with the truth so powerful, it left them undone, and yet whole. This is the true wine, the spirit that alcohol symbolized long ago, not a liquid, but a state of being. What's tragic is that many today chase this feeling, this union, this release, through alcohol, unaware that the high they seek has nothing to do with fermentation. What they truly desire is the soul's homecoming. And while alcohol offers a temporary distortion of consciousness, spiritual inebriation offers a revelation of it. But how is this state reached? Not through consumption, but through surrender, through meditation, prayer, chanting, selfless service, through dissolving the ego, not through intoxication, but through awe, through deep stillness in which the soul is finally heard. When this true intoxication arrives, there is no need for escape, because reality itself becomes sacred. Every breath is a prayer, every moment a celebration. This is what the ancient term spirit once pointed to, a reminder that within us there is a place so full of love, it spills over, and we are left, not stumbling, but soaring,